This is the Chapter 13 study guide, Achieving Energy Sustainability by Sheila and Elizabeth. So there are a lot of different types of energy. The first I'll talk about is non-renewable energy, which is an energy source that is being depleted much faster than it can be replenished. And a few examples of this are fossil fuels and uranium ore. Um, then the next is potentially renewable energy, which is an energy source that can be regenerated indefinitely as it is not over harvested. And some examples of that are biomass energy resources, which we'll get into later. Um, then the next kind is non-depletable energy, which is an energy source that can't be used up. Some examples of that are solar, wind, geothermal energy, and hydroelectric and tidal energy. And finally, there are renewable energy sources, which are the combination of potentially renewable and non-depletable resources. And examples of that are wood, animal manure, and fish and animal oils. They've been used by humans for thousands of years, and they're still used in developing countries. In the United States, renewable energy sources provide only 7% of energy used, and because usually we use biomass and hydroelectricity. Um, and then using any form of energy has an impact on the environment, and all energy choices have environmental consequences. The best approach to energy use is to minimize it through conservation and efficiency. Excuse the typo. Um, Now we'll go into energy conservation and how we can go about doing that. So there are both individual methods and public methods. And first we'll talk about individual methods. Some ways that individually we can work to conserve energy are by lowering thermostats during cold months, consolidating errands to drive fewer miles, turning off the computer when it's not being used, among many other things. And some public methods of energy sustainability is to improve the availability of public transportation, taxing electricity, oil and natural gas, and offering rebates or tax credits for retrofitting a home or a business to operate with less energy. And then energy efficiency. And so increasing energy efficiency means obtaining the same work from a smaller amount of energy. And you can conserve energy by not using an electrical appliance, but you can also conserve energy by using a more energy efficient appliance. And both do the same work with the less energy. So the end is pretty much the same. And a way to do that is to switch to Energy Star appliances. And usually you can find those online if you just look up Energy Star appliances, and on most stores they should like different appliances should be rated if they are an Energy Star certified. And a good example of this is electric lighting advancements. And then energy sustainability. Energy conservation and energy efficiency are the least expensive and most environmentally sound options for maximizing our energy resources. And we need to rely as much or more on reducing the amount of energy we use as on developing renewable energy resources. Also, reducing peak demand is really important, which can be done by setting up a variable price structure. And peak demand is the greatest quantity of energy used at any one time, and more energy must be available than is needed under average conditions. So customers pay less to use energy when the demand is lowest and more when the demand is highest. And sustainable designs. These can improve the efficiency of the buildings and communities we live and work in. And some examples of this would be building houses close to where residents work or into the side of a hill. This reduces the reliance on fossil fuels for transportation, which reduces pollution and the amount of carbon dioxide released into the air. And building houses into the side of the hill can provide insulation and reduce the need for heating and cooling, and it also improves air quality. Next is passive solar design, which is a technique that takes advantage of solar radiation to maintain a comfortable temperature in buildings. And this stabilizes indoor temperatures without the need for pumps and other mechanical devices. We can also use recycled materials and use efficient radiant heating systems. So, additionally, you can place windows where the sun will warm the house and reduce the need for artificial lighting. You can use double-paned windows to insulate while still allowing solar radiation to warm a house. And then there are different colors can also make a big impact. So if you put dark materials on your roof or your exterior walls, that absorbs more solar energy and it warms the structure. And then conversely, using light materials on a roof or exterior walls reflects the heat away and keeps it cooler. The sun is the ultimate source of fossil fuels, and most types of renewable energy are derived from the sun and the cycles driven by the sun, including solar, wind, hydroelectric power, and plant biomass. So, what's the difference between modern carbon and fossil carbon? So, modern carbon is carbon in biomass, and it theoretically shouldn't increase net atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations, which is known as carbon neutral, which is an activity that doesn't change atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations. And scientists are currently discussing whether using biomass is truly carbon neutral or not, but theoretically it should be. And then fossil carbon is carbon in fossil fuels. It has been buried for millions of years, and it results in the rapid increase into the atmosphere of carbon dioxide concentrations. It was out of circulation for many years until humans discovered it and began to use it in increasing quantities. And burning fossil fuels results in the rapid increase in the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, because we're releasing stored carbon that hasn't been in the atmosphere for millions of years. So is biomass better? And that just depends. It depends on how the material is harvested and processed. It depends on how the land is treated during and after the harvest. And it also depends on how long carbon has been stored. So solid biomass. There are many different types of biomass, but the first I will discuss is wood. In the United States, approximately 3 million homes rely on wood as a primary heating fuel, and the net removal is when more timber is removed than can be replaced, which is an unsustainable practice. Tree removal can be sustainable if we allow time for forests to grow and regrow, but it can also increase habitat diversity and total photosynthesis if individual trees from an abundant species are harvested. The next type of biomass is charcoal, and it is lighter than wood and contains around 2 times more energy per unit weight, but it's a lot more expensive than wood. It's the fuel of choice in urban areas of developing countries and for families who can afford it. And then the last type of biomass we're going to discuss is manure, and it's used in regions where wood is scarce. And burning it releases a particular matter and other pollutants into the air, which can cause a variety of respiratory illnesses. So manure is definitely not the first choice, but sometimes you live in a region where the other two options are just not available, so you have to do what you can to get that energy. And now biofuels. So biofuels can be used as substitutes for gasoline and diesel. One type of biofuel is ethanol, and it is made by converting starches and sugar from plant material into alcohol and carbon dioxide. It is usually mixed with gasoline, and flex fuel vehicles can run on the gasoline of E85. And E85 is 85% ethanol and 15% gas, and it has a lower energy than gasoline, so you need more. It's called gasohol to go the same distance. And the U.S. is a world leader in ethanol production. And producing it takes a lot of energy and takes away from food-growing land, and it could also increase the net atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration. And then the next type of biofuel is biodiesel, and in the United States, most biodiesel comes from the soybean oil or processed vegetable oil. And carbon dioxide emissions from combustion of biodiesel are lower than those from petroleum diesel. And B20 can be used in any diesel engine, but is usually more expensive than petroleum diesel. And B20 is 20% biodiesel and 80% petroleum diesel. Now we're going to talk about hydroelectricity, and this is electricity that is generated by the kinetic energy of moving water, and it's the second most common form of renewable energy in the United States and in the world. It is the form of energy that's most widely used for electricity generation. So, how does it work? Moving water contains kinetic energy, and a hydroelectric power plant captures this kinetic energy and uses it to turn a turbine, which is like a steam in a coal-fired power plant, and the turbine transforms the kinetic energy into the water into electricity. Then the electricity is transported to an electrical grid. The amount of electricity produced depends on the flow rate, which is the amount of water that flows past a certain point per unit time. And the higher the flow rate, the more electricity that can be generated. It can also depend on the vertical distance the water falls, and it sometimes depends on both. It accounts for approximately 7% of the energy of the electricity generated in the United States. So, run of the river systems. This is when water is retained behind a low dam and it runs through a channel before returning to the river. And so it has advantages and disadvantages. One main advantage is these type of systems don't store water in a reservoir, so there's relatively little flooding upstream and the flow is never disrupted. But that comes with some disadvantages. So it's small and it can be intermittent because they rely on the natural flow of the water. So it can't generate electricity in hot and dry periods when the water level is low because they don't store water in the reservoir. So in that way, its advantage actually winds up being a disadvantage in some types of climates. And then next, water impoundment systems. So these store water in a reservoir behind a dam. And unlike the run-of-the-river system, dam operators can control the flow rate of water and therefore how electricity is generated. So some examples of this is the Grand Coulee Dam in Washington and the Three Gorges Dam in China. The Grand Coulee Dam in Washington is the largest water impoundment dam in the United States, and the Three Gorges Dam in China is the largest in the world, and it actually supplies about 11% of China's total electricity demand. And lastly, we have tidal systems, which rely on tidal energy, and the movement of the water is driven by the gravitational pull of the moon. These use gates and turbines, which are similar to run-of-the-river and impoundment systems, to capture the kinetic energy of water running through estuaries, rivers, and bays, and use that to convert it into electricity. However, they don't have the potential to become a major energy source because in many places, the difference in water levels during high and low tides is not great enough to provide sufficient kinetic energy to generate a large amount of electricity.